If you're visiting, we're doing this series called Legacy, and we're looking, in a couple weeks, we're celebrating our 150th birthday. It's going to be a great day, 9, 10, and 11, February 9, 10, and 11. 10th will be Sunday. We're going to have a single service, real big, great service, 9 o'clock, right, Steve? 9 o'clock, single service. And we have a whole bunch of previous pastors that will be participating in that service. So if you've been here through the ages, you'll get to see how they've aged. Whatever else you might be interested in, it's just going to be interesting for that alone. And we got the wheelchair ramp cleared, and it's just going to be awesome. But on Saturday, the 9th, we have a big festival. I don't know what the best way to call it, but out on the parking lot all over, things for every age. It's going to be great fun. Sunday night, a concert, and then Monday we have, we call it a leadership training. Daryl Johnson, who's going to be preaching that morning, will be speaking on Monday night, and we call it leadership, but you're all welcome to come, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. So join us for any and all that you can. But as we look at this, we want to be thinking not just of the legacy that this church has been through the years, but far more important is the legacy that we will be in the future. The song we just sang speaks of a central truth of the Christian faith that I hold to deeply, is that Jesus is coming back. We don't know when, but we got to be ready. And Jesus is coming back. But we don't know when, obviously. And so it could be tomorrow. It would have been nice if it happened before I'd prepared this sermon, but it could be this week. It could be another 150 years. But in whatever time the Lord has for this church to be a functioning, thriving part of Ventura, we want to be the best that we can possibly be. We want to be the most dynamic and faithful, most effective church that we can possibly be. And it's not easy to do. We have to ask ourselves, it's very important, we touched on this last week, as we come to this celebration, is it going to be a milestone or a gravestone? It's a real important thing to think through because it's really up to us which way it will go. It can be a gravestone if really all we do in this celebration is look back to either some real golden years or mythical golden years of when the church did this or looked like that with little or no interest to the future. And we want to be a church that's not looking at the past only, celebrating the past to be sure and grateful for all that God has done in the past. But we want to be a church that has our eyes on the future, that whatever God has done for us in the past, it's going to get better. It's going to be more wondrous. And so we have to ask that question. Are we looking at this celebration as a milestone, a continuation of God's great goodness and wonders, or is it a gravestone? And alongside that, it fits with, are we asking the question, are the best and most fruitful years behind us, or are they ahead of us? And I truly would like to think that they're ahead of us. I think we should hope for that. I think we should work for that. I think we should pray for that. Without ever yielding and ceasing to give thanks for all the great things that have happened through 150 years, to say, God, make the next 150. If you don't come back in that time, make the next 150 be the best this church has ever known, the best for our city, and to be a part of that. But it's not easy because you don't have to look very far to realize that the church in the Western world is taking a lot of hits. In the Western world, I mean Europe, United States, North America. Same is true, of course, for Australia and New Zealand. They're way west. But the Western world has struggled with the faith for decades and decades. The churches in all those areas are shrinking rapidly. The Presbyterian Church has lost 2/3 of its members since about 1970, and is rapidly shrinking. The Episcopalians are shrinking faster than that. And every mainline denomination has, for decades, over 50 years, been shrinking considerably. Lutheran Church, Methodist Church, you can just name them. Even in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you can think of churches, denominations that were growing. Even when all the main lines were shrinking, you can think of churches that were growing fast and strong. The Southern Baptist, Assemblies of God, Church of the Nazarene, all growing. But as we've come into this new century, not one of them is growing, and in fact, all are shrinking. They are all on the decline. The church in the Western world is taking hits, and it's a little confused about what it's about, who it is, what its task is. And we'll never be a thriving church looking for the best years ahead of us if we don't know who we are, what we're about, why we exist, what our purpose is. And we're confused because of a lot of reasons. For one thing, we live in a culture where, once again, in the history of the world, the history of humanity, is everyone wants to do what's right in their own eyes. That what the scriptures teach about what's good and right, who God is, and what he wants of us, and we've pretty much abandoned that. Even in churches, that's abandoned. For each person instead to decide, well, who do you think God is? And what do you think it means to follow him? And the church becomes confused. We live in an age that feels that it's not confused at all about the church. It just doesn't really like the church or trust the church. And we feel that. We feel in our lives that we're sometimes against the culture, going against the grain. And it makes it a little hard to be outspokenly Christian, up front with our faith, because you just increasingly get weird looks and funny stares and interesting comments. One of the things that it's done is it's made our faith become more privatized. I remember a church I worked at in seminary, and this was a long time ago, but it's even more true today. An elder of the church, as we were trying to teach that the youth group should be more vocal about their faith, the elder in charge of youth ministries said, there's no way that I'm coming to church more than an hour a week, and there's no way that my faith is going to be anything but a private thing. I do not believe we should force anything different on our kids. And that's why the church is struggling, why its golden days may be behind it in some ways. And we want to be different. And so in order to be that, we want to be a church that's looking at these questions honestly and asking another, what can we do today that we might flourish in the years ahead? That we might be a flourishing church truly making disciples of Jesus at every corner and every age of every generation that we possibly can. What do we do today? And so that leads us to yet another sermon in a series, Legacy, Our Touch Across Time. And today, looking at the idea of no subcontracting allowed. And I don't know if you know what a subcontractor is. Maybe everybody does. When I was at my church in Washington, I was an associate pastor there. And the church had started with the gift of a 1-acre lot of land, and they built this beautiful little church in 1913. And just before I'd arrived there, the church had bought a 10-acre farm right next door. And then we expanded, we had a parking lot. And in one of my early years there, we decided we were going to take the farmhouse of that farm and turn it into an office building, which we had no offices. We all worked out of classrooms. And we turned this farmhouse into an office building. We added a big youth room off the back of it. And we had a man in the church named Dennis who was a contractor in the area, built houses, nice houses. And he was in charge of a whole bunch of 40, 50, mostly guys who came to build that office building. And he gave us all tasks. And he brought me into the big room that was going to be the youth room, and he pointed to a back clean wall, and he said, the plans call for 2 closets, one on each side, to be going in. Can you frame a closet? I said, I can frame a closet. That's easy. And he says, that's your job. And off he went. So I was framing, starting that, cutting 2x4s, and another guy, a buddy in the church, we're all working together and having fun. He comes in and says, what are you doing? I said, I'm framing closets. And he goes, you need help? I said, sure. So we started framing closets together. About 20 minutes later, Dennis came in to check how I was doing, and he saw Bob, who was helping me, and said, what are you doing here? And he said, I came in to help Mark. And I said, yeah, I subcontracted, thinking that was a funny line. You thought it was. Even Kay thought it was. That's a big step for me. And I said, I subcontracted. And he goes, no subcontracting allowed. And he said, Bob, I had you working out in front on the siding. What are you doing in here with Mark? Back out on the front. And so Bob went out, and I was left to the closets alone, and Dennis said, no subcontracting. Every guy here has a job. And if you take him out of his job that I've assigned him to help you with yours, then that job's not going to get done. No subcontracting allowed. And one of the struggles with the church, one of the things that's made it weak, is we've subcontracted. we've subcontracted most of our ministries. What we've done is fallen into a grievous error. I mentioned it briefly last week. We've fallen into this grievous error as a larger church around the world, is that we've made this class of people, this group of people, labeled clergy. And as a church, we've handed ministry to them and said, we will pay you and we'll support you and we'll give you balloons on your birthday. And you do the ministry for us. And you know what? This has become so normative that even us on staff have fallen into this. You know, John Exel's here for years, and he did the buildings, did a phenomenal job on the buildings, took care of the buildings. And it was really easy for me, probably all of us on staff, to just say whatever needs to be done for the care of the buildings, John will do it. Even though it's as much my church as John's, it's as much our church as John's, we just handed the responsibility of caring for the property of the church to John, instead of remembering that it's the responsibility of all of us to take care of this place. But it was really easy when a phone call would come in and somebody would say there's a paint chip here or a broken thing on the wall here, and I could just say really easy, John's bricks, I'm Bible. And I could hand it off. And there's other ways that we've done it. We got dear Wayne, who's been with us for years, 8, 9 years now? 10 years. See, the fun just never ends. It just keeps going. And we've handed to Wayne our care. He's done a phenomenal job on it, and we've been so grateful for it. But Wayne's retiring sometime in the near future. And we, even more importantly than that, we have to recognize that the responsibility of care in this church, it's not Wayne's job, or Bruce and I and Wayne. It's our job. And when there's a friend in the hospital, it's up to all of us to care, to love, to pray. When someone needs a meal, it's not up to a small little group like the deacons to do it. It's up to all of us. What we've done in American Christendom, Western Christendom, is we've become a people who are willing to come and sit in the pews, and we want to hear beautiful music. We want to have our time in the presence of God, but by and large, we are happy with putting money in the offering plate to pay someone else to do our ministry for us. We subcontract. And it's one of the reasons the church struggles, because we were never made to be subcontractors. And the reason for that is really simple. God has a task for each of you. He has a task for me and Bruce and Wayne, and I mentioned it last week, that our task, our job, is to prepare the saints, to equip the saints for the work of ministry. But God, in his great kindness, and it really is a kindness, a privilege, he said, I have a ministry for all of you to make a difference in this world and to make differences in people's lives. And if we subcontract out, then somebody that needs to be working in one way is being taken away from the job they need. We all need to be a part of it. So with that in mind, listen to the scriptures. This is from 1 Corinthians 3, verses 5 to 14. And we're just kind of diving in. There's been a debate of which pastor is more important, more holy, more devout, more powerful. Is it Paul, the Apostle Paul? Is it Apollos? And Paul's responding to this. He says, what then is Apollos? What then is Paul? We are merely servants through whom you all have believed, as the Lord has assigned to each one. I planted the seed, but Apollos, he gave it water. But it was God working through both of us that gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters matters at all. The one that matters is God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are united in the common work, and each one will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are co-workers who are under the ownership of God himself. And you are God's field, God's building. According to the grace of God that's been given to me, like a skilled master builder, I've laid a foundation, and someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care how he builds upon it. Let each one take care of what he adds to the foundation. There's no other foundation that may be laid. The only one that's allowed is Jesus himself, Jesus Christ, for there is no other foundation. But if anyone builds on that foundation, be it with gold or silver or precious stones, or for that matter, wood or hay or straw. Each person's work will one day be shown for what it is. For in that day it will be disclosed. It will be revealed through fire, and the fire will test the work that each and every one has done. The word of the Lord. We got this situation in Corinth, and there's debate and infighting and struggle between who's the best. And a whole lot of what the Corinthian letters is about is Paul trying to teach the church is that it's not about one pastor being over another or better than another or holier than another. We're just in it together with you. That's really how you should see Bruce and Wayne and I. We're just in it together with you. We're all disciples of Jesus trying to work faithfully the call that he has given to us. It's a different call for each one of us, and the only thing that matters is that we each do the call that's been given to us. None of you are called to be me or Bruce or Wayne. You're simply called to fulfill the task that God has given to you. And something astonishing happens when the church does what God called it to do. When each person picks up that little bit, that's when the church comes alive. Because you take those who are really good at behind-the-scenes work, and that side of the church becomes strong. You take those who are strong in music, who love music, and they do their work that they've been called to do, and that side of the church becomes strong, and it flows onto the rest of us as worship and singing becomes easier for us. You take those people, and our church has a rich history, a legacy of these people who are good teachers, and you take those people who are called to teach, and you don't ask them to sing, but you allow them to teach and fulfill their call, and when they fulfill their call and they teach us what it means to be a disciple and how the scriptures are to be understood and unfold, then the whole church grows. The life of the church is not dependent upon any one person, and especially not dependent on someone like me. If it is, you're doomed. It depends on the whole of us, each of us doing the task that God has given to us. And this is a lot of what Paul has in mind when he looks at this. He says, it's not the one who plants that counts for anything. It's not the one who waters. We're just doing the work that God gave us. I preach a sermon. Bruce preaches. Wayne will preach. Steve's leading the choir. And what we're all doing is playing our role, doing our bit that God's handed. And the one that matters in all this is not the one who preaches or who leads music or takes care of people, but it's the Lord, who in his incredible kindness, and think about this, he has said, I will come on Steve and anoint Steve so that his work with this group and other musicians is God's work and it shows his fruit. It's the same thing we hope with sermons, that it's not me, it's not my wisdom, there's nothing I have to give you. The hope and the prayer, when any of the three of us stand up in front of you, is that God is going to come and you're going to hear him. He's going to take these words of Scripture and my thoughts and ideas, and he's going to weave them together, and he's going to speak to you a word that strengthens you. And there's nothing more exciting, nothing more enriching and fulfilling for anyone in any place in the kingdom of God than to feel as though God is using them for good. We were made for this. And so Paul can say, it doesn't matter who plants, it doesn't matter who waters, because we're all about a common work. Working together for a common goal of the building of the church. And what matters in it all is this story that God comes and takes all of us weak people with our worries and weariness, and he comes to each and every one of us and he uses us to bear fruit for his kingdom. And when he does this and you realize that this fruit that's coming is nothing that I've done, nothing that I could have accomplished. It's God flowing through me. And you feel a sense of God's presence. You feel a sense of his love. You realize that you're part of his great plan, and nothing gives life and energy to the church more than that. But we miss it if we subcontract our ministry to somebody else. If you subcontract your ministry, your call to somebody else, and you ask somebody else to do what God's called you to do, then you'll never know that experience. You'll never know what it feels like to have God speak through you, love through you, touch through you. And it's those experiences that make the faith come alive. You realize that this isn't just an idea. There is a God at work, and he's at work in my life. And he even used me to touch you. There's nothing more exciting. Paul makes it really clear. We're just co-workers belonging to God. It's a beautiful way to say it. We're co-workers belonging to God. We're not co-workers with God because there's only one who does the labor. We are co-workers belonging to God. We're God's field. He uses these metaphors. You're like God's field, God's building. As God's field, somebody plants the seed, someone pulls up the weed, someone pours the water, someone drops the fertilizer. It's all the task. But it's God who gives growth. And we each must be careful how we build. Because at the end of things, how we live our lives matters. That in that day when Jesus returns, who we are and what we've done will be held up. And we want to be a people, and we have such a testimony of these kind of people in our church. I can look out and see them in this room at this very moment, people that I believe with all my heart that when that day comes, or you're called home to Jesus, that he'll say, well done, good and faithful servant. But that should be the single striving goal of our lives, that every minute of our lives is turned to hearing those words, to what do I need to do, Lord, in your church and for your church? What do I need to do in this hurting and broken world where people are confused and baffled? What can I do? What must I do? So that I would hear those words from you, because nothing is more precious to me than to hear those words. Nothing matters to me, nothing more than hearing those words. For him to say, you did what I told you to do. You did the task I've set before you. And I want my life, and I hope you want your life, to be singularly devoted to that purpose. What does Jesus want for my life? What can I do to make his kingdom grow, to make his church thrive, to help people see his wonders, and to one day hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant. I mentioned last week one of my mentors, one of my heroes, Ernie Lewis, who was at this church for a year as an interim pastor. We worked together up in Washington, that same place where we did the office out of the farmhouse. And Ernie, a pastor, 6'4", he'd stand in the pulpit and grab around it. He was in the Marines. He said, came to our church, which was having a lot of troubles. He came to our church, and in the first sermon he said, I've been a pastor for 40 years in the Presbyterian Church. And before that, I spent 3 years in the South Pacific in the Marines, and it's those years that have prepared me for this church. It woke him up. He said, some of you need to cool your jets. But the thing with Ernie is he could say tough things, and you knew he loved you. I've never known anyone like that could challenge you at every part of your life, and he'd say to me, son, you need to work on this. And you knew he loved you. One of the things Ernie said, I heard him say this more than once, he said to the church, you cannot pay me enough to do your loving for you. And we should own those words. And you should recognize that I'm trying, and I hope Bruce and Wayne are trying to live this out. You can't pay us enough to subcontract for you. You can't pay us enough to do your ministry for you. You have a call, and our job is to help you do it. And to help you be strong in that, to help you flourish in that, and to help you see how God flows through you in that. And we should have this as our word that we say together to one another, holding each other accountable. You can't pay me enough to do your ministry for you, your loving for you, your teaching for you, your care for you. Because I have enough of my own, and God has given me a task. Here's a fun thing. All this boils down to loving Jesus. Because Jesus said, if you love me, you're going to do what I say. And the more our heart opens to him, the more eager we are. But sometimes, somewhere, we've become content in our love for Jesus to just learning more about him and growing in our knowledge of him. And I can say there's probably no one worse in the church than me. I love reading theology. I love thinking about him. But when thinking about him and the ideas of Jesus come to overwhelm the reality of him and the obedience of just following what he says, then something's gone wrong. I want to show you a little video that's really fun. A modern-day parable, you could say. Listen to this. Watch.
What's the deal?
What?
I told you 3 days ago to clean your room.
I
I'm glad you know it's a mess.
I memorized what you said.
What do you mean you memorized what I said?
Every word.
Wait, you memorized that I told you to clean your room?
Yes. And I learned how to say it in Spanish and in Hebrew. And if you want to know how to say it in Spanish, it's Yo limpio el dormitorio.
That's what? That's
Spanish.
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 Okay.
And I read a book. It's called 5 Ways to Clean Your Room. It just really helped me to understand like what you said, and it was really life changing. It was awesome. And I had friends from my small group over. It was so good. We talked about like the importance of a clean room and like what it's like to have a clean room and like how you should have a clean room. It was so good. It was absolutely incredible. And Susie came over, you remember? Yeah, she came over and we like mapped it out on a sheet of paper on what my room would have been like when I did clean it, and it looked really good. Like everything was really precise.
Okay. Well, keep up the good work.
Thanks. I love you. Keep holding me accountable.
In closing, we're all called to be a people who don't just know about Jesus. I mean, it's good to know about him. We should be reading our Bibles backwards and forwards. We should know the scriptures. We should know doctrine. It's really important. But we can never let that be an excuse or a means to get out of what he's called us to do. You've been called to a ministry. And I hope you know what it is. It's different for each and every one of us. God's called you to a ministry, and the church thrives only when each one is doing what God has called us to do. And no subcontracting. You can't give this away. In closing, let me read a poem to you. Maybe some of you have heard this about the prints in the sand, footprints in the sand. And listen, it's very powerful. One night I had a wondrous dream. One set of footprints there was seen. The footprints of my precious Lord, but mine were not along the shore. But then some stranger prints appeared, and I asked, Lord, what have we here? These prints are large and round and neat, but Lord, they are just too big for feet. My child, he said in somber tones, for miles I carried you all alone. I challenged you to walk by faith, but you refused. And you made me wait. You disobeyed, you would not grow. The walk of faith you would not know. So I got tired, and I got fed up, and there I dropped you on your butt. Because in life there comes a time when one must fight and one must climb, when one must rise and take a stand or leave their butt prints in the sand. You have a call. You have a mandate.